Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The Conservatives are demanding more transparency from the Trudeau government in light of a recent report which says that China interfered in the 2021 federal election. Another UCP MLA and a minister will not be seeking re-election. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will have the details. And an exciting professional bull riding event is coming to Lethbridge next month. BCN's Micah Quinn will have the story.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Conservative MP Michael Cooper says he wants the Liberal government to be more transparent over any possible election interference here in Canada. This follows a report by the Globe and Mail which said that CISA's claim that China interfered in the last federal election, helping Justin Trudeau get re-elected.
We need answers. We need to get to the bottom of this. It's critical to ensure that our elections and the integrity of our elections are protected from foreign interference, and to ensure that this type of interference does not happen in future elections. But what we need is transparency as a starting point, and that's been part of the problem here. This was a sophisticated campaign of interference, and it's impossible to believe that the Prime Minister was unaware of it.
Alberta Trade Minister and Calgary Northeast MLA Rajan Sani announced that she will not be seeking re-election in May. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson says as we get closer to the election day on May 29th, more MLAs may be making a similar move.
You do have to wonder if some of the folks who ran against Danielle Smith for the leadership might not want to run this time around. But there hasn't been very much of it. There was a little bit of shuffling around back sort of in September, October. Minister Schweitzer, I believe, had left his position. So there could be some more of it. There may be some in the New Democrats, but you just have to wonder with everything that's gone on in the UCP in the last couple of years, if there's not a couple more people who aren't sort of throwing their hands up and deciding they might return to private life, I should say.
Mr. Dawson will also discuss how the UCP is leading the NDP at the polls and how the government can shore up support when the budget is released next week. He'll have details coming up after business news. As newsrooms across the country continue to cut staff and publishers navigate through tough financial waters, the publicly funded CBC appears to be thriving. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation recently obtained records which says CBC staff earning six-figure salaries have doubled under the Trudeau government. Now, to talk about this in more detail is the federal director of the CTF, Franco Terrazzano, who joins us once again from Ottawa. Now, Franco, so how many full-time equivalent CBC employees took home six-figure salaries, and what did the numbers actually add up for with the public broadcaster?
Yeah, well, in 2015, there was 438 CBC staffers that were taking home a six-figure salary. Fast forward to 2021, and there's 949 CBC staffers that took home a six-figure salary, which means that the number of CBC employees that have a $100,000 plus salary has doubled under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And here's what might be the craziest part of all of this, okay? During the pandemic, since the beginning of the pandemic, there's now a 220 increase to the number of employees that are making six-figure salaries. And remember, the CBC is taking more than $1 billion from taxpayers every single year. So it's the struggling taxpayers that are footing this bill.
Now, you say that the growth of the CBC did not stop during the COVID-19 pandemic when so many Canadians were struggling financially?
Well, and get this. According to another access to information request that we dug up, the CBC handed out $51 million in bonuses and raises during the pandemic years, okay, while so many taxpayers in the private sector may have taken a pay cut, lost their job, or even their business. And the CBC turns around and hands out $51 million in bonuses and raises during those pandemic years.
Thanks so much, Franco. That was Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joining us from Ottawa. Well, we had more snow and frigid temperatures here in southwestern Alberta and Lethbridge today. Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early look at the forecast. Jeanette, fortunately, by the time the weekend arrives, so should a new warming trend.
Yeah, well, that is the silver lining in this whole week, Hal. Not so much tonight, though, as we're looking at an overnight low of -27. It's going to feel more like in the -30s by the morning. We'll be feeling it more like -38 with that wind chill. With the daytime high on Thursday of -23, we could still see some more flurries. Keep in mind as well, we are going to be having a risk of frostbite with those wind chill values. And as we get closer to the weekend, that's when it will start to warm up. And I'll have all those details along with the national forecast coming up later on in the show.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. You know, much of the prairies are experiencing some bitterly cold temperatures right now. That includes us here in Lethbridge and in the Stampede City as well. Calgary is not only seeing frigid temperatures, but the city was also blanketed with 25 centimeters of snow this week. Environment Canada says Calgarians should also brace for temperatures dropping to -31 degrees by Friday morning. In order to help keep people safe, the Salvation Army is setting up warming hubs at light rail transit stations across the city. A bitterly cold Arctic air mass has also settled over southern Saskatchewan, bringing extreme wind chill values below -45 degrees. The city of Saskatoon activated its extreme cold emergency response plan in response to the bone-chilling cold that has descended upon the city. Under the plan, more than a dozen warm-up locations are made available throughout the city. The frigid cold has also hit parts of Manitoba hard and prompted extreme cold warnings that closed some schools and canceled school bus service in some areas. Some schools were closed in the western part of the province on Wednesday. Schools are open, but bus service is canceled in some other areas, such as the Rolling River Division north of Brandon. You know, this is the time of year when many Canadian snowbirds escape from Old Man Winter and head somewhere south. But lately, it's not just the United States they're moving to, it's Mexico and Central America. Steph Farr is the founder and CEO of a villa rental company in the Mayan Riviera. She says if you're worried about crime, don't be, unless you're trying to compete with the Mexican cartels.
It's really about what you're coming to do when you come to Mexico. If you're coming to just enjoy a family vacation and just do your own thing, you're at absolutely no risk. It's really any potential visitor that actually crosses the line or oversteps their boundaries in terms of being involved with the cartel, competing with the cartel, as silly as it may sound. You hear cases of deaths or Canadians that got shot and by the cartel, but you don't hear the full story behind it, which is that they were actually involved with the cartel, competing in their territory.
Make sure you catch the full interview with Steph Farr, with Maya Lux, and BCN's Naveen Day coming up in the second half of our program. Woods Homes is set to brave the very cold weather on Saturday. The organization is taking part in the Coldest Night of the Year event, which will raise money for the emergency youth shelter here in Lethbridge. Since 2011, the annual event has raised $58 million across Canada in 166 communities. Officials with Woods Homes told us it's a way to shine a light in our community for those experiencing hunger and homelessness. Today is Pink Shirt Day. It's a day when many people wear pink to stand and take a stand against bullying in every form. It was bullying in a classroom that brought about Canada's first Pink Shirt Day. 2 students stood up for another student who was being bullied, and because of that courageous act, we now honor Pink Shirt Day early February. In a release, Alberta Education Minister Adriana LaGrange says bullying can be a problem anywhere, whether it's in schools, workplaces, homes, or on the internet. It can also happen to anyone at any age, old or young. That is why it's important to choose to be kind to people around us. Now, the original event was organized in 2007 by grade 12 students David Shepard and Travis Price in Nova Scotia. They bought and distributed 50 pink shirts after a grade 9 student, Chuck McNeil, was bullied for wearing a pink polo shirt on the first day of school in Cambridge, Nova Scotia. Lethbridge police have charged a 51-year-old man with manslaughter in connection with the death of a 78-year-old resident at a local care facility. On January 6th, police were notified of the death of Kenneth Hale, who was a resident of St. Michael's Health Centre on the city's south side. Hale's body was taken to Calgary for an autopsy. Now, following an investigation, police determined that Hale was assaulted by another resident at the same facility on December 26th of last year. Hale later died from his injuries about a week later. 51-year-old Wesley Red, young man of Lethbridge, is charged with manslaughter and aggravated assault. He remains in custody and will appear in court on Thursday. Professional bull riders from around the world are set to test their mettle against some of the toughest bucking bulls around. The PBR Canada Elite Cup Series will take place at the NMAX Centre here in Lethbridge on March 3rd and 4th. As video journalist Micah Quinn explains now, It'll be tough for each bull rider since they have to hold on for a crucial 8-second ride.
Canadian Buck and Bull of the Year.
Bull riders will be up close and personal with raging bulls during the 2023 Elite Cup Series as the clock continues to tick toward the 2023 PBR Canada Championship later this year. Jason Davidson, the general manager for PBR Canada, explained what the two-day event is going to look like.
So night one, we'll have 25 riders compete. The top 5 scores will come back in what we call a bonus round, the 5 versus 5, and compete for an extra $5,000 prize pool and very valuable points. As well, the next night, the same 25 riders will ride again. The top 10 aggregate scores on 2 bulls will then move into the championship round Saturday night.
Unfortunately, not every bull rider makes it a full 8 seconds.
Sit up, Rock.
Competitors will also be competing for a large chunk of change.
In Lethbridge here, we have just shy of $30,000 in added prize money. So the winning rider could walk out of the NMAX Center with approximately $8,000 for 16 seconds worth of work.
Davidson said around 60 bulls will be let loose during the Elite Cup Series, with each ranging in size from 1,500 to 2,000 pounds. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
He's trying to make it 3 for 3 in Lethbridge.
I don't know if you could pay me enough to ride a 1,500-pound bull. Wow. The Lethbridge District Exhibition has a new president. Ryan Miller has been named as the 56th president of the association. Now, in a media release, Miller says it's with great pride and sense of responsibility to be elected as the president of the Lethbridge and District Exhibition Board of Directors during this exciting milestone year for the organization. He adds that the opening of the new Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center will provide a place for community celebration and bring a regional, national, and international spotlight to our agriculture industries. As if Turkey and Syria haven't been through enough, another earthquake, this one measuring 6.4 on the Richter scale, killed 8 more people and injured 200 more in the region that laid waste 2 weeks ago by the massive quake that killed more than 44,000 people. Officials say the quake was centered near the city of Uzunbag in Turkey's far south near Syria and the Mediterranean Sea. It's the latest of thousands of aftershocks following the initial devastation on February 6th, demonstrating how the lethal danger from quakes can continue long after the first one. A year after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, FEBC's reporters are interviewing local Ukrainians, asking how the war has really impacted them. They're also asking how the suffering of the past year affected their view of God. We have more now in this report.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine irreversibly changed Ukraine and its people. But how are everyday Ukrainians processing the war? And what do they believe now about God in light of all that has happened?
Стало важче, але що робити такий час, треба терпіти, треба вірити, все буде добре.
Чи стали частіше ви звертатися до Бога в молитві там про себе?
Кожен день. Кожен день, да, молюся, щоб все було добре, щоб всі були здорові, живі. І хлопці, які на фронті, і всі близькі. Бо, ну що робити?
Якщо б ви могли поспілкуватися з Богом, от як зі мною зараз напряму, яке б запитання ви хотіли поставити?
Чому він нам більше не допомагає, щоб було краще? Щоб всі були живі. Ой, пробачте, я більше не можу.
Я перепрошую. Чи стали ви звертатися частіше до Бога в молитві там, можливо, таких обставин?
Якщо чесно, то ні, не став, бо розумієш, що, я не знаю, в мене такі погляди, що де був Бог, коли все це почалося.
Ви вважаєте, він допустив війну в Україні?
Ні, не він. Це не його вина, але як можна тут на нього сподіватися, коли все відбувається, як відбувається, що не є добре.
Скажи, як змінилося твоє відношення до Бога за час цієї війни?
Дуже сильно. Дуже сильно змінилося. Почала більше вірити та довіряти йому. Всю війну перебуваю в Миколаєві під постійними обстрілами і переймалась більше за свою сім'ю, напевно, ніж за себе, тому вірила.
Incredible to see God at work everywhere. Now, speaking of which, a 12-day revival continues down at Asbury University in Kentucky. A pastor from Melfort, Saskatchewan, who drove with a group all the way down to Kentucky to take part in the worship, says on Sunday alone, there were close to 25,000 people who attended. Pastor Paul Dubois says people are hungry for the Spirit of the Lord.
You're talking about a community that's about 5,000-6,000, people that live there, and it swells to an extra 25,000, right? So it's, there was the lineup to get into Hughes Auditorium was, they said it was a mile long. People are asking, why Ashbury? Well, why not? Why not Lethbridge? Why not Brooks? And why not Melfort? Why not? And I think that it's not a question of if God will send a revival. It's a question of will we step into it when God does it.
The experience of just abiding in the Lord and the worship of God in such a pure way with so many people that were hungry from all over the world, and to see the unity in that, whether you were in one of the side halls or chapels or outside in the grass in front of screens, just people with their hands in the air just praising the Lord as a group. Like they had police officers in different areas and they were sitting on the roof of their cruisers or leaning against something, just standing and watching everything. There was absolutely nothing but people on loving each other all over the place.
And there are reports that the revival has now spread to more than 20 college and university campuses across the United States. Incredible to see and experience. Hopefully you either have an incredible battery or block heater for your vehicle. You're going to need it as the temperature is set to plummet here in southwestern Alberta. Full weather details are coming up. This is the time of year when we discuss wind chill values. We've been experiencing minus 20 to 25 earlier today, but with the 20-kilometer-an-hour winds in Lethbridge, it felt a lot colder. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, how much colder are we talking about?
Well, with the wind chill, it did feel more like minus 33 today, Hal. And brace yourself, because that's going to get even colder overnight. We're looking at wind chill values of minus 38 by the morning when we get up tomorrow. Thursday, though, we are looking at a daytime high of minus 23, but with that wind chill, it is still going to feel more like minus 31. So we're not out of that until at least Friday. And look at that, we're warming up significantly by then. Minus 12, the high for Friday under clear, sunny skies. Sunshine also expected on Saturday with a high of 0. That'll feel so tropical and balmy, especially by Sunday as we look at a high of 3 degrees. It will be nice to get out there and do some winter activities, maybe go skiing. It will feel much nicer than it does this week. And then we're looking at Monday's high 0 and a minus 1 on Tuesday to round out that 7-day forecast. So as we look to the almanac here, the average high for this time of year, 3 degrees. Average low, minus 10. 17 was our high temperature on this day back in 1973. And in 1957, it was minus 34, and that's without the wind chill as well. Okay, the sun rose this morning, 7:29. Sunset this evening. We're looking at 6:01, so we're now in that 6 o'clock hour, which is making it feel so nice and so light in the evenings. We're looking at 10 hours and 28 minutes of daylight. Both Victoria and Vancouver expecting overnight flurries, clearing up in both cities by morning. 3 degrees the high in Victoria. 1 in Vancouver, both of them expecting gusty winds up to 70 km. Extreme cold warning in effect for Edmonton for most of this week, minus 22 the high, but feeling more like minus 44 with that wind chill. And of course, we're looking at a risk of frostbite as well. Minus 26 the high in Calgary. Calgary expecting a few more flurries by tomorrow. As we look to the rest of the prairies, same thing. We're seeing those extreme cold warnings in effect. Risk of frostbite in minutes, as a matter of fact. All of these highs, it's going to feel more like high minus 30s and minus 40s for Saskatoon, Regina, and Winnipeg tomorrow. But we are looking at a high of minus 23 for Saskatoon, minus 24 in Regina, and minus 23 as well in Winnipeg. And like I said, going to feel so much colder. So definitely bundle up, keep warm, keep safe if you are in the prairies. 0 the high in Toronto. Toronto looking at a risk of freezing drizzle and mixed with the ice pellets as well. So they are under a winter storm warning there. Snowfall warning in effect for Ottawa this evening, 10 to 15 centimeters. Another 2 to 4 centimeters expected tomorrow. -9 the high there, -12 the expected high in Montreal. Montreal also expecting a blowing snow advisory, and they could expect up to 60 kilometer per hour winds with 2 centimeters of snow, just making it very gusty and a lot of blowing snow. -12 the expected high in Fredericton, looking at a 60% chance of flurries there. Halifax expecting 2 centimeters there, -8 the high tomorrow. -11 the high in Charlottetown, and -8 as well in St. John's, Newfoundland. They're also looking at a snowfall warning in effect this evening with some more flurries expected tomorrow. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
Top financial leaders from the Group of 7 and the broader Group of 20 are gathering in India to tackle challenges of global growth and stability. The country is hosting Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland and fellow members of the G20 for the first time in 20 years. This week's gathering takes place just a year after Russia invaded Ukraine, setting off a cascade of shocks throughout the world economy. European-based aircraft maker Airbus says it's looking to hire more than 800 people in Canada this year. That includes around 500 for newly created positions. Airbus says the new jobs are part of its efforts to increase A220 aircraft production in Quebec. It says around 700 of the new hires will be in that province. The company and its subsidiaries have more than 4,000 employees at 10 cities and offices across Canada. Porter Airlines is celebrating new flights between Toronto and Calgary. The airline now flies to Alberta's 2 biggest cities as it grows its national network. The new service begins with 2 daily nonstop return flights, increasing to 3 daily as of June the 1st. The 132-seat aircraft that are being used have a 2x2 configuration, meaning there are no middle seats. The U.S. Transportation Secretary wants U.S. freight railroads to act immediately to improve safety. Pete Buttigieg announced the reforms in the wake of a fiery derailment in Ohio. The February 3rd accident exposed the community of East Palestine to potentially hazardous chemicals. The Environmental Protection Agency has ordered Norfolk Southern Railway to pay for the cleanup. Alan Shaw says his railroad is committed to cleaning up the mess and helping the town to rebuild. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 59 points on the day to finish at 20,193. The Dow was down 84 points to 33,045. The S&P 500 was down 6 on the day to 3991, and the Nasdaq was up 14 points to 11,507. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 249 to 73.87 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 9 cents to 216 US. Gold was down 9 cents to 18.2530 US an ounce, and silver was even at 21.51 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12 per bushel, barley's at $9.14, canola's at $18.45, and corn is at $11.28 per bushel. Live cattle were up 15 cents to $164.90. Feeder cattle March contract was up $1.10 to $187.98, and lean hogs April contract was down $2.55 to $86.55. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 73.79 US. Recapping one of our top stories, much of the prairies are dealing with a nasty cold snap. Here in Lethbridge, we've been dealing with temperatures around -25 degrees. Warming shelters have opened in Calgary at transit stations as Calgarians are experiencing temperatures below -30. And in many parts of Saskatchewan and Manitoba, locals there are having to deal with wind chill values below -45 degrees. Environment Canada says we here in the western provinces should begin to see a reprieve sometime by the weekend. The Alberta provincial election is coming up on May the 29th. Now, it appears as though the UCP is gaining in popularity, according to some of the recent polls. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will have details for us momentarily. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar. The Family Center downtown Lethbridge is providing a weekly opportunity for dads, uncles, and grandfathers to play and connect with their children. Me and My Dad takes place on Saturdays from 10 to 11:30 a.m., featuring fun, brain-building activities for male caregivers to play with their kids. This program is free and open to children under 12. For more information and to register, visit famcenter.ca. On Saturday, February 25th, Streets Alive Mission is hosting their coldest night of the year fundraiser. This family-friendly walk is to raise money to help those who are experiencing hurt, hunger, and homelessness. To register, donate, and to find out more information about this event and Streets Alive Mission, visit cnoy.org/Lethbridge. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
The federal government released some details on the Just Transition Plan. Now, the Trudeau government actually renamed it the Sustainable Jobs Plan, in large part due to criticism they received here in the province. Now, to talk about this plan in more detail and what it means for Albertans, we're joined by our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who joins us once again from Edmonton. Tyler, this is the first time we've seen what the Sustainable Jobs Plan is all about, and you have some details for us.
That's right. So a lot of the stuff that's in this plan has already been released. There have long been sort of training programs and regional panels, and there's about 10 different actions listed, and they've all sort of been started or budgeted for, those sorts of things. But what this really does is collect all of this information in sort of one place. And sort of give a broad overview of what it'll look like, and that's things like considering what transferable skills might exist. If you work in a refinery, can you go work in a hydrogen facility, kind of thing. But it's thin on practical details. In a lot of ways, this is a plan for more plans. This plan is sort of to guide the next couple years until 2025, and then there's going to be plans sort of every 5 years after that to continue sort of guiding this transition. So, people who are looking for very, very concrete details on how it's going to affect them, how it's going to affect their workplace, they're not going to get it there. It's pretty high level, broad, vague, you might say, statements about what this is going to look like, which I suppose in some ways isn't entirely surprising. Let's say the federal government had put out a plan that says, we're going to lose 100,000 jobs, and here's how we're going to try and move all these people into new areas. People would freak out. So it is a bit vague, but it does give us sort of this broad overview. And maybe the most important part of it is that it just does suggest, whether one agrees with it or not, that they are actually thinking about how to sort of make this thing work.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that was done by design as well, so it didn't give Premier Daniel Smith a lot of ammunition as for phasing out a lot of the oil and gas sector, which a lot of Albertans are quite concerned about. Tyler, the budget is coming out next Tuesday, and the government is already dropping a few hints about what's going to be in there. One item that's already been released is a historic $2 billion for primary health care.
Yeah, that's a big chunk of change, which I think probably suggests this is going to be a bit of a big spending budget, which would not be atypical in an election year either. $2 billion in primary health care, and I believe $234 million specifically for sort of frontline primary health care, finding new doctors, things of that nature. I don't think it's a surprise that this would be one of the budget details that's come out this early. This is an issue that is always polled very, very high for Albertans, and especially because the United Conservatives need to sort of broaden their appeal beyond their base, beyond their supporters. They do need to be talking about some of these sort of bread and butter issues that animate sort of a broad cross section of Albertans. And obviously in the post-pandemic time, wait times are way up, surgeries are still being delayed, all that stuff. Healthcare is very, very front of mind for adults, and I think especially those Albertans who have children. So no real surprises there, I don't think. But of course, we will see next week what the rest of it looks like, especially when it comes to something like affordability measures, which we haven't heard a ton about lately, and we might see in this budget.
Yeah, and like you said, hopefully a lot of that funding can help draw more doctors to our province, because I know here in Lethbridge, over 40,000 people still don't have a family physician. So it's not just here in Lethbridge, but I know a lot of cities across the province with a physician shortage. Now, there's been a bit of controversy involving a well cleanup program, Tyler, that Premier Daniel Smith's government is piloting. I guess the idea behind this is that companies are obliged to clean up orphan wells, but many of them have not been cleaned up.
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange one, and the idea has been around for quite some time. It went under the name of R-Star a couple years ago, and it has since sort of been renamed. But yeah, the idea is that there's all these orphan wells out there, some of them quite old, that haven't been cleaned up, and companies are legally obligated to clean them up and sort of return that land to sort of a usable state for landowners. And so the proposal by the government is basically saying, look, there are all these wells that haven't been cleaned up, and they might never be cleaned up unless we provide an incentive for it. So it's going to be a pilot project at this point. Details, it's still sort of in the development phase, I would say. And they're budgeting, I think, up to $100 million in royalty breaks for oil companies that go and clean up some of these wells. And Premier Daniel Smith has said the idea is to tackle some of these oldest, worst maintained sort of wells, the worst of the worst, to get them dealt with as soon as possible. Now, where the controversy comes in is, as I mentioned, companies, they have to do this anyways. So why is the government, essentially giving them a tax break or giving them tax dollars to go about cleaning them up? So it's funny because this is one of those things that actually had come up a little bit at the United Conservative Party conventions a couple times, and some of the people I've spoken to in the last few years who are really, from sort of a small c fiscal conservative perspective, concerned about this use of tax dollars to sort of bail out corporations to some extent. And that's a similar line to what you're seeing from the New Democrats on this. So will that go ahead? A little bit tough to say. What will the blowback be? I think there's going to be considerable political blowback, in the legislature. Does that transfer to sort of on the ground frustration and anger? That's a little bit harder to predict, I think. But an interesting program. And I should mention, the other reason that this is really controversial is before Danielle Smith entered politics, she was sort of involved in the business sector, and she had sort of lobbied for this program. And now that she's in power, she's putting it in place. So there's a little bit of a, not to say that she has a conflict of interest, but her critics are sort of suggesting that there's a conflict of interest issue here as well.
Tyler, we recently heard the verdict of Justice Paul Rouleau's report saying the federal government had every right to invoke the Emergencies Act during the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa last winter. Now, Justice Rouleau also made mention of the Coutts border blockade.
He did. So the Coutts border blockade, I'm sure everyone in Lethbridge remembers that a little more clearly perhaps than those of us in Edmonton. I think it was 17 days long, and there's a handful of people facing rather serious sort of weapons charges in relation to that protest. And so Justice Rouleau looked at Coutts as an example of why things had sort of spiraled out of control, beyond the local policing problems and local intelligence problems in Ontario and in Ottawa specifically. He said, look, this was a genuine crisis. You had some sort of extremist cells in Coutts. You had this lengthy blockade of a major economic corridor. And this was the sort of thing that really could have informed the federal government's decision-making on invoking the Emergencies Act. So Alberta did get a little shout-out, makes it sound a bit fun, which is not necessarily what Justice Rouleau was going for, but Alberta did get a bit of attention in that report. And I should also mention that Tyler Shandro, the Justice Minister, did come out and say, look, Paul Rouleau's report does not change the government's view on it. They still think it was unnecessary, and they're going to continue to support the lawsuits that are in court over the use of the Emergencies Act.
We're getting closer and closer to the provincial election, which is coming up on May the 29th. While we hear a lot about both the UCP and the NDP, there doesn't appear to be a lot going on with the other parties, including the Alberta Party and the Liberal Party. Tyler, like the United States, it appears like Alberta has become a two-party system here.
Yeah, I feel like that's a question that political scientists are maybe watching and scratching their heads because, of course, in the last election, the Alberta Party had some presence, so did the Alberta Liberal Party. And, both those parties had seats, I think, not all that long ago. So it's sort of an interesting situation because both parties do have leaders at the moment. The Alberta Party in particular has a couple candidates here and there, but we're really not hearing very much from them. A little bit hard to say why. I mean, they're obviously small shops, and it's hard to get media attention and those sorts of things. But it is interesting to see that when Stephen Mandel was the leader of the Liberal or Alberta Party, gosh, it's so confusing that they both have basically the same name. The Alberta Party, he managed to make it into news stories, much like Elizabeth May did as the Green Party of Canada leader. And we just don't hear very much from them. So maybe that'll change in the weeks or months ahead. But it is just notable that there are these two other parties, but they're, pretty quiet. Maybe they're hibernating in this cold snap.
A few years ago, we had Stephen Mandel on our program, Bridge City News, and I asked him how he would sum up the Alberta Party. He says, we're fiscally conservative, but socially liberal. So I found that very interesting. Tyler, Trade Minister Rajan Sani has announced that she's not seeking re-election this spring. As we get closer to the election, do you think maybe we'll hear from more MLAs from both the UCP and NDP who may step down?
There hasn't been much of it, has there? Leela here back in October, I guess it was, also said that she would not be running for the UCP, although I'm actually blanking now on whether or not she said she might run as an independent. And I think Drew Barnes said he was going to run as an independent again as well, and is not, seeking to get back into the UCP. So you do have to wonder if some of the folks who ran against Danielle Smith for the leadership might not want to run this time around. But there hasn't been very much of it. There was a little bit of shuffling around back sort of in September, October. Minister Schweitzer, I believe, had left his position. So there could be some more of it. There may be some in the New Democrats, but you just have to wonder with everything that's gone on in the UCP in the last couple of years, if there's not a couple more people who aren't sort of throwing their hands up and deciding they might return to private life, I should say.
Speaking of which, and former Premier Jason Kenney made the news recently as well because he's involved with a Calgary law firm.
Yeah, Bennett Jones, I think, as sort of a political advisory sort of job. This is the sort of job that a lot of former politicians land in. At that firm, Christy Clark's involved. James Moore, his former colleague in the Federal Conservatives, is involved there. So he has landed on his feet, shall we say.
Tyler, it appears as though the province likes panels. I'm not talking about solar panels, but panels like the one headed up by former Reform Party leader Preston Manning. But now there's a 5-member panel which will be looking into the future of the oil and gas sector?
That's right. It's a little bit of a joke in legislature circles. This government, this party loves panels. You had the Fair Deals panel. You had the panel looking into Alberta's expenditures. There's just a lot of them. And this one is, as you said, going to be looking at the future of the oil and gas sector. And it's sort of primarily industry veterans, a couple folks who worked for the Alberta Energy Regulator, sort of folks of that nature. And the interesting thing about this, I would say, is there's no real indication they're going to be consulting sort of outside experts or the public. This does seem to be sort of more an internal panel between industry and some of the ministers in the government. So, in the context of the Just Transition Plan, in the context of the energy crisis that sort of resulted from the war in Ukraine, there's I think it's an interesting moment, I guess, to be convening a panel like this. So it'll be quite interesting to see what this panel comes back with about the future of the sector and where the province might want to take it.
Tyler, Premier Danielle Smith was chatting on a radio show last weekend, and she raised concerns about mission creep on the part of professional organizations. Can you explain?
Sure. So, there's all sorts of professions that are regulated by these organizations, psychologists, lawyers, doctors, to name probably the 3 most prominent. And the sort of 2 instances that have been in the news lately is psychologist Jordan Peterson, who's found himself in some trouble with the Ontario College of Psychologists. And then there was in Alberta, the Law Society of Alberta had rules essentially that lawyers needed to take a training program on Indigenous history and culture as sort of a fulfillment of one of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. So a caller to the radio program had asked Danielle Smith what she thought of this, and she said that she had some concerns about it and suggested that, if it continues to some point, she might be willing to take some government action. Now, she did say that would take considerable public consultation to figure something like that out. These societies are sort of more or less autonomous in the regulation of their professions, and I think something like that would probably generate a lot of blowback from the legal profession. But it's an interesting just sort of example of how I guess people have concerns about this and are wondering if government's going to step in some fashion.
Before we let you go, let's chat about some of the recent polls talking about the popularity of the UCP and NDP. If an election was held today, I think the last time we chatted, the UCP was up by a few percentage points. Where do we stand now?
I think it's about the same. It's been interesting because the UCP was trailing the New Democrats for such a long time. And, now 100 days out or so from the election, they appear to have got a little bit of a lead. And, they have a real opportunity next week with the budget to sort of solidify some of that. As we've talked about before, Calgary and the suburbs of Calgary in particular are really where the UCP and the New Democrats need to try and fight over some seats. So I think it'll be interesting to look at that budget and see what maybe targeted measures, what measures might be of interest to those voters. So it's hard for a government to get that much done at this point. Bureaucrats are already looking at sort of transition stuff and coming up with transition plans. So it's really quite difficult to come up with and implement really bold, big sort of policy changes. So one of the big things that I will be looking for is what that budget is going to do, because it's an election year, because there are some specific areas where both parties are going to be fighting over seats. And the UCP is going to want to solidify and try and extend that lead.
Yeah, and for us here in southwestern Alberta, we're going to see how many more potential capital projects will be coming our way here in Lethbridge. He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Thanks so much for joining us today from Edmonton.
Always a pleasure, Hal.
According to a recent poll by CIBC, 24% of Canadian snowbirds are off to Mexico, Central America, or South America to flee the harsh winter months that we experience here in the Great White North. So, what makes Mexico such an enticing location for winter travel, especially when compared to the U.S., namely Florida, which is home to many Canadian snowbirds and expats? Joining me to discuss this is a Canadian-born entrepreneur who moved to Mexico, Steph Farr. She is the founder and CEO of Maya Lux, a villa rental company located in Mexico's Mayan Riviera. Steph, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So first off, Steph, tell us what made you fall in love with Mexico and the Mayan Riviera?
So I originally moved to Mexico 15 years ago. I stepped foot in Cancun with the intention to just travel and explore the destination. My work as well overlapped with what we do, which is luxury villa rentals. And I fell in love with the destination specifically for the weather. Being a Canadian, born and raised in Montreal, escaping the cold winters, it was a luxury to be able to have this tropical destination. The water, we're considered to be on the Caribbean side. So we have turquoise, incredible beaches, white sandy beaches. So, and not to mention the vast jungle as well. So it's really an incredible array of just from the incredible weather, the beaches, the jungle, and the culture, which is the most important thing as well. It's just been really a unique experience.
Now, in my younger years, it seemed like many of the retirees that went away for the winter would head down to Florida or Arizona. Nowadays, I'm hearing more and more people are choosing Mexico. Why the recent boost in popularity?
I think it's multifaceted in the sense of, number one, since the pandemic, it's just really easy for everyone to come here and escape to Mexico. We didn't have any restrictions. So you didn't have to get tested for COVID. You didn't have to be vaccinated. It was just really, we'll take everyone and anyone can come and enter into this destination. So it's just the ease of traveling here. As well as if you compare the peso to the dollar, the cost of living is much cheaper here. And so just in general, the quality of life, and then of course, add on the weather, but the quality of life, everything's at your disposal here. And whether you're looking to hire a full-time chef for yourself, something that we're not used to. I would never, growing up had a chef at my disposal, but that's something that is really affordable for most Canadians coming in. And I think it's just that knowing that you have the incredible weather, you're on some of the most incredible beaches, and of course, your Canadian dollar just takes you so much further than what it would in Canada. So it's a win-win.
Now, you mentioned the pandemic. For a country that relies so heavily on tourism, why wasn't the pandemic such a concern?
We were open the entire time. The cases varied based on different destinations within Mexico. I believe because we're an open air, any tourist destinations and open air, we didn't suffer from as many cases. And to be honest, it really was Mexico we knew that we just had to continue and move on. Nothing's, we're not going to stop. Business continues as usual. And so for us, even as a company, our company thrived. We had more visitors than we did in 2019.
Wow.
The pandemic was actually the year of the pandemic was actually our best performing year in terms of rentals and occupancy rates for our homeowners.
Wow.
So many new businesses had opened. And again, because we were one of the only destinations in the world that stayed open. And not to mention, did not require any type of testing on arrival. And so there just weren't any restrictions. We were just like welcoming everybody. And so that just became the ease of use of travel. So if, those that were looking to travel to the Caribbean destinations, they were either closed or it became an insanely difficult application process just to be able to get in. And so we know it's going on vacation. We want something that's easy and convenient. So yeah, it was actually a great year for us.
That's just amazing to hear how your business thrived in the middle of a pandemic when other businesses were were either being restricted and eventually had to shut their doors. Now, a follow-up question to Mexico's boost in popularity. The subject of politics has been a very divisive one in Canada and the U.S. in recent years. So do you think Mexico gives Canadians and Americans a break from all that political drama?
Absolutely. And that's probably a major feedback that we get when we meet with foreigners that are joining or moving. It's just that it's just simple. It's back to the basics when you come to Mexico. It's really, I like to say, disconnecting from what's going on and able to connect and come back to what's important and being able to shut out and, really just focus on what's important for us and not really just constantly having, our ears filled with with some noise and political noise. And it's just basic and we're able to escape from all of that.
Now, one thing Canadians love to boast about when we are out of the country is our public healthcare system. What options do Canadians have while in Mexico if they need medical attention?
Yes, so essentially, depending if they're traveling as tourists, but also if they're looking to move and plant their roots in Mexico, of course, there's options of private insurance that's very affordable. And then, of course, many Canadians opt to not even have the insurance because it's just cheaper. The medical system is just cheaper. If you just pay for a case by case, if you want to visit with a GP or you need a specialist. Let's say an emergency at the hospital with x-rays can come out to be about $200. That's just an average. But it's the accessibility. Again, doctors will come to your house if need be, even just, for example, traveling to different destinations where we had to get our negative COVID test. They'll come to your house, take the test, send you your results. It's just a matter of having your doctor a phone number away, can call, make an appointment, and you don't have to wait months or, it's just literally make an appointment. You could have that x-ray the next day or the MRI the same day. So it's much cheaper even if you are going the private route and you don't have if you're not paying for an insurance either, just appointment by appointment can be relatively or exponentially cheaper than private in Canada. And it's also the accessibility and the timeliness where it's just everything's much faster and convenient.
So for snowbirds who want to spend, say, 6 months down in Mexico and they want to forego the travel insurance, how much money should they set aside for their healthcare then? Do you have a recommendation?
I would say, I would say max, or I don't want to say max, but I would say around $500 a year.
Really? Wow.
And that's not considering any type of emergency or whatnot, but 500 is extremely generous.
That's amazing. Now, Mexico has been in the news quite a bit lately. Drug cartels can be a concern for visitors who don't know the area or have never visited the country before. Now, we are hearing news that violence is ensuing following the capture of one of the sons of El Chapo. How concerned should we be if we're considering visiting Mexico?
That's a great question. We get asked that very frequently from potential guests or even travelers that are looking to move. We say, to be honest, it's really about what you're coming to do when you come to Mexico. If you're coming to just enjoy a family vacation and just do your own thing, you're at absolutely no risk. It's really any potential visitor that actually crosses the line or oversteps their boundaries in terms of being involved with the cartel, competing with the cartel, as silly as it may sound. You hear cases of deaths or Canadians that got shot and by the cartel, but you don't hear the full story behind it, which is that they were actually involved with the cartel, competing in their territory. So to be honest, I consider it extremely safe. My brother moved here 10 years ago, raised his young kids here, gated communities. They're riding their bike, doing their own thing, going to visit their neighbors, just walking over. It's really a very tight community based on the different pockets of where you're living. And I would say it's not something that anyone really needs to be concerned about unless they're going into the party scene or the drug scene. Then I would say, just proceed with caution.
Okay. I remember walking around the streets of Playa del Carmen on my first trip to Mexico, and I went solo, and I felt completely safe doing that. Now, there are many different places in Mexico to visit: Cozumel, Cancun, Puerto Vallarta, Cabo, and I know I'm just scratching the surface of where all you can visit there. What destination would you recommend for first-timers?
Well, I may sound very biased because this is where I am, which is Riviera Maya. Riviera Maya, of course, is the stretch between Cancun all the way down to Tulum. And it's basically about 7 destinations in one destination. So I consider this to be one of the top destinations to come visit for a first timer. Why? Because it's also super accessible, major direct flights to any major city in the US, Canada, even Europe, South America, Central America, Istanbul even. So it's really a hub that is accessible to pretty much any city in the world. And there's just an array of things that you could do here. Whenever I have someone coming to visit, I'll always say, at least block off 10 days, because we're talking from visiting the ancient Mayan ruins to all the different types of beaches, to going into the jungle and swimming in the cenotes, which are these natural sinkholes. There's just so much to do, and just to be able to get in the car and pretty much drive and do everything. It really caters to almost every single demographic: families, friends, couples, bachelor parties, bachelorettes, everything. So I'm a huge advocate on coming to visit this area. And especially, again, I can't mention enough, the beaches are incredible and the waters, never gets old.
The first time I went, I did a lot of tours, but the second time I went, I tried to save some money and I just rented a car and I drove to all these attractions. So what cost-saving tips can you give to future travelers to protect them from getting nickel and dimed upon arrival? Anything from car rentals to tours to transportation?
That's a great question. I always say, do your research prior to arrival. Where most travelers can be taken advantage of is at the airport, when they look like they don't really know what they're doing or where they're going. So they're great targets.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. So I always suggest do the research before. Look at the different transportation companies, for example. Don't just wait to get one there at the airport. The same goes for the tours. Do that research in advance, because you'll find some that are, better than others or not as commercial as others, that will take you a little bit more off the beaten path. And then little things like ATMs. Do not take your money out at just a regular ATM sitting on the main streets. Make sure you go to a bank. like a bank ATM, because there they'll charge insane fees, and also there's a possibility of cloning credit cards. So that's number one. Another trick that I always tell our guests are do not take a taxi at a taxi stand, which is what most people will do. Hail down a taxi from the streets. You will be able to get a rate that's about half, at least half or a third of the price of what you would get at a taxi stand. So those are little tips. Definitely when you're renting a car, always check with your credit card company first that you're renting the car with, because most of them already come with insurance. They'll protect you against any type of collision or damages, whereas these rental car companies will pretty much charge almost double the cost of even the car itself and the insurance. I think that's pretty much, anywhere we travel, but that's something to really pay attention to. And again, I suggest calling your credit card company first to see what type of insurance they offer. Those are just little tips that we'll always give to our guests before they travel with us.
Now, we're just about out of time, but I wanted to squeeze in one more question here, because I hear your business also takes an interest in supporting vulnerable communities in the Mayan Riviera through its Rise Relief Fund. Can you just tell us quickly about that?
Yes, thank you so much for asking about that. It's something that I'm super passionate about. With the development of the region, it's growing really, really fast in terms of development of new condos going up, a lot of private home developments. And so with the business that we do, which is private villa rentals, we also feel like we may be contributing to the problem of, just from a sustainable aspect of contamination to the water, jungle that we're tearing down. So we have implemented RISE, which is based on 3 pillars: sustainability, community, and education. We donate 1% of our sales. So anytime a guest books with us, we take 1% of that and we give it back to either one of the 3 pillars, which is our projects through sustainability, helping restore the coral reef, education, working with schools, and then of course, community of helping build and maintain our Mayan communities in the area. So that's a super passion of mine, but also it's really the forefront of Maya Lux of what we do, which is giving back.
That's amazing. Great to hear. And I'm glad you're doing something that you're really passionate about and enjoying a lot of vitamin D. But that's all the time we have for today, Steph. We really appreciate having you on the show today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Steph Farr is the owner and founder of Mexico-based Maya Lux. I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.